Alright, hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be going into Module 1.4A. So this module has been split up into two parts, A and B. The first part is going to be about considerations while writing a speech. So as you can see on the board, I've written here three main considerations that you must make before writing your speech. And those three things are purpose, audience, and rhetoric. Alright, so the first thing is going to be purpose. Now your purpose is what drives the content of your speech. In other words, as I've written here, it's your objective. Meaning, this is what's going to be the message that you want to deliver to your audience, right? You want to ask yourself these two questions that I've written on the board. Very important questions before you even begin to write your speech. Which is, number one, what are you trying to accomplish by giving your speech? And number two, what message do you want to deliver to your audience? If you can answer those two questions, then you can figure out your purpose. And if you can figure out your purpose, then you can start drafting your speech. So many of you probably think, Samir, it's great and all that you've given me, how to identify your purpose, but how exactly do you make your purpose clear in your speech? Well, these are 5 steps that I use. In the first step, you need to write down the message that you're trying to deliver to your audience, right? The first step to solving any problem is identifying the problem itself. So you need to ask yourself and figure out what exactly is the problem I'm trying to address in my speech. The second step, probably the most important step, is brainstorming. In this step, what you need to do is write down everything and anything that comes to mind. Do not censor any thoughts. Write it all down on paper. Then, in the third step, that's when you're going to start organizing your thoughts. Typically, what I do is I split my thoughts into three different categories. The first category being the least important, the second category being somewhat important, and then the third category being the most important and most relevant ideas. In the fourth step, you're going to start to write your speech. But you're going to write your speech based only off of those ideas that are in the most important / most relevant category. That's what's going to really help you shape the content of your speech around your purpose. In the final step, what you really want to do is practice. Practice is really, really important. What I recommend doing is taking a video of yourself or practicing in front of a mirror so you can really watch yourself and figure out your own deficiencies. Do some introspection and self-criticism. Really find out the categories in which you lack. You can also practice in front of friends and family. I've seen that this helps a lot. After giving them your speech, ask them, what was the purpose of my speech? Or what message did you receive from my speech? If they can answer that question correctly, congratulations, you've completed your task. But if they can't, then that means you need to go back to the drawing board and figure out which step of the process you need to put more time into. Alright, so the second thing that you want to identify, that's really important to identify in fact, is who are you talking to, right? That's going to be your audience. And there's 3 different types of audience that I'm going to talk about in this next section of the lecture. The first one is a sympathetic audience, the second one is an apathetic audience, and the third one is an antithetic audience. Okay, so the first type of audience is a sympathetic audience. The main thing that you really want to observe about any audience you're delivering to is their position on your beliefs. So with the sympathetic audience, you already have an advantage. That advantage being the fact that they already agree with what you're saying, right? So this allows you to be way more informal in the way you deliver your speech, in the sense that you can be more straightforward with your points, you can be a little bit more humorous with your points, because they'll be more comfortable with hearing you speak that way. Not only will humor help you, but also just talking to them in a conversational tone. You don't want to sound like you're preaching to your audience. You don't want to sound like some kind of politician talking to his constituents in a very formal manner. You want to be talking to them like they're their friend in a sense. You can be, as I said earlier, a lot more informal and conversational when talking to a sympathetic audience. All right, so the second type of audience is an apathetic audience. This type of audience is neutral, meaning they neither disagree nor agree with the point you are making in your speech. What this probably means is that your audience doesn't know much about the topic or subject you are speaking on. Now, this entails that you must make your purpose very, very clear in your speech so that your audience exactly understands what you are trying to say. Now, the only way to do this is for you to provide enough background information and context on the topic of your speech. In addition, what you must do is go into the various counter-arguments and arguments on the topic you are speaking on. This means that you not only talk about arguments that are in favor of your side, but you also talk about arguments that are against your side. This will allow you to come off as a more truthful speaker, and it will allow you to be more convincing and persuasive in your purpose and speech overall. All right, so our last type of audience is an antithetic audience. This type of audience disagrees with you, meaning they probably don't like what you're trying to say. So what's really important to do here is to ease them in to the message you are trying to deliver. Meaning, don't be too straightforward or frank with them. Of course, you want to deliver your message and make your purpose clear, but what I mean by that is don't be blunt with them. Kind of show them exactly why what you're saying is reasonable. Now, the best way to do this is to elaborate on all of your points. As I mentioned here, elaboration is key. This means that you should break down your points to the most basic elements possible. This will allow you to make it so that your audience has no choice but to agree with what you are saying. Now, another really important thing to do here is to make sure you don't sound ignorant. And the way you want to do that is to address both sides. As I said earlier, you really want to address both counter-arguments and arguments. So whenever you make your own arguments, address the arguments that your audience would probably make. In this case, your opposition, of course, because your audience doesn't agree with you. So talk about the things or the responses that they would give you, and then explain logically and reasonably why those responses are wrong. Again, you really want to be careful not to be too blunt or straightforward with them while doing this. They will take it as an insult, and they probably won't end up agreeing with you or changing their minds. So it's really important that you use many appeals to reason and logic in order to be a persuasive and convincing speaker. Remember, as I've written here, your main job is to open up their minds. Meaning, you might not get them to agree with you immediately, but at least you'll get them on the process, or you'll get them to change their opinions eventually as a result of your speech. All right, so the third and final thing that we're going to cover is rhetoric. Now, your rhetoric is shaped by your purpose and your audience, which is exactly why I'm covering it last. But there's really three main aspects to rhetoric that I want to go into for right now. Now, rhetoric in itself is a very complicated topic. In fact, many people have written works on rhetoric, trying to explain what the different aspects of it are. But for the sake of this class, I'm going to keep it very basic. So, as you can see here, I've drawn a triangle, and on each of the three corners of the triangle, I've written three Greek words. These three words are ethos, pathos, and logos. I'm going to go ahead and explain now what each of these three Greek words means in English. Okay, so the first part of the triangle we're going to cover is pathos. Now, these are your emotions. You want to ask yourself, what do you want your audience to feel as you are delivering your message? Right? In other words, you want to make sure you add a human touch to your speech, right? The one thing that separates robots from humans is the fact that robots can't feel anything. They do not have emotions. So it's really important that you're able to communicate with your audience on a personal level. That is the best way to make an impact on them for a long time. You want to leave a lasting legacy on your audience, right? The best way to do that is to be emotional in your speech. Not overly emotional, but have some aspect of emotion in your speech. All right, so the next part of the rhetorical triangle is ethos. Ethos are your ethics and credibility, basically. So let's start with the second part, which was credibility, right? So it's really important in your speech that you establish yourself as someone the audience should listen to. Now, the best way to do this is, once again, not to appear ignorant. Make sure you come well informed and ready to give your speech. In other words, practice a lot, do lots of research, and make sure you're getting the opinions of others before you give your speech to your audience. This is especially important when you're giving your speech to an antithetic audience. Now, the best way to do this, especially in persuasive speeches, is to use outside facts and evidence to back up what you're saying. Now this doesn't mean that you drown out your own voice by offering only facts and evidence from outside sources. It simply means that you're backing up your reasoning with other studies, maybe other pieces of evidence and other facts that have been provided by other credible sources. Now, let's move on to the idea of ethics. Ethics, or morals, I guess you could say, are kind of good social standards, right? It's what society deems as good. So for example, if you're talking about the death penalty, you might appeal to the standard that killing is bad. Or maybe if you're talking about the idea of isolation in prison, or solitary confinement as they call it, you might appeal to the idea that we should be nurturing better people, right? Instead of punishing them severely, we should be nurturing them to become better people, right? So once again, this ties into emotion in a sense, but it looks more at social standards. So you want to appeal to these social standards in order to get more people to agree with what you are saying. All right, so the final part of rhetoric that we're going to cover is logos. Now, this is your logic and reason. So you want to ask yourself, right, are your arguments rational? Meaning, do your arguments make sense? And you might ask me, well, what exactly does that mean, right? That ties into the second thing that I've written here, the second question. In other words, this means, are your arguments factual? Are they reasonable? Are they truthful, right? You want to make sure that the arguments you are making are based on true, real evidence. You don't want to just be making up arguments for the sake of satisfying your own wants or needs. It's really important that you make appeals to reason, truth, and logic in order to make your speech stronger. Now, the final thing about logos, probably the hardest thing, is making sure that a common audience can understand what you are saying. Now, what exactly does this mean? Often, people will talk about very, very complicated topics. So it's really important that they're able to break down what they're saying, right? Now, this is exactly what you want to do in your speech. If you're talking about something that's very complicated, or something that the common person who you can literally just pull off of the street and talk to, right? If you're talking about something that kind of person can't understand, you want to make sure you break down those concepts to such a basic level that they can understand it. That is the art of logos, really. It's your ability to explain things very clearly in a logical, reasonable, and cohesive manner. So that concludes Module 1.4A. Again, for these three rhetorical aspects that I just mentioned, right? Pathos, ethos, and logos. You don't want to weigh one of them too much in your speeches. Now, what I mean by this is that you should probably have a mix of all three. It has been found that speeches that have a mix of all logos, pathos, and ethos, pretty evenly distributed throughout the speech, tend to be the most successful and the most impactful. All right, so that concludes Module 1.4A. Hopefully you got those notes down, and you can go ahead and take the quiz now. Thank you.